What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. So despite all of the kinda like just go face memes and jokes calling Hearthstone a coin flip simulator, Hearthstone's actually a little bit more difficult game than it first appears, where the best players are definitely able to consistently rise to high legend, win tournaments, while the worst players are stuck at high ranks playing the exact same decks. Though, it's definitely still fair to say that some decks are easier to play than others, and some you can kind of almost play pretty much on autopilot. Now pretty much as a disclaimer, we're not trying to say that these decks are brain dead or take zero skill to play, but they're definitely easier to play and master than something as more skill intensive, something like Miracle Rogue or Freeze Mage. So without further ado, let's talk about our picks for the easiest decks in Hearthstone that are definitely still viable to play in Standard today. And if you guys enjoyed the video, definitely hit that like button and let's begin. So at number 4, first up, it's Token Druid. So mid-range decks in Hearthstone tend to be, a little bit easier to play when compared to other kinds of decks, mainly because all you're kind of doing is developing threats, removing your opponent's threats, and just playing minions on curve. Druid especially tends to fall into this kind of pattern since most Druid decks just ramp up and then play your big minions on curve, or you just play your removal when you need to. Now Token Druid definitely has a little bit more to it since you're also trying to synergize making tokens with buffs like Power of the Wild, and you have additional synergies with stuff like Arcane Giant and stuff like that, but the basic idea in general is pretty much the same, honestly. Usually the hardest decisions you're going to have to make with this deck are when to use your innervates and which option to choose on your choose one cards, although Fandral definitely makes that easier sometimes. Token Druid certainly has some difficult situations lined up occasionally though, and it's definitely a deck that can take some time to perfect and play at an absolute perfect level and master, but playing it at a competent level doesn't really take all that much effort. All you really do is kind of just ramp up, develop your things, kill your opponent's things, and just dominate the board. And while it's not completely that simple, having a solid basis in combat and just playing to the board is all you really need to do to be able to succeed with this deck, and that's why it definitely belongs on the list. A couple of tips and tricks for those of you guys trying to play Token Druid out there. So first off, you definitely want to pick Spell with your Raven Idol, especially in the early game, since it usually gives you another chance at things like Wild Growth and Ramp. You only ever really want to go for a big minion if you're playing against a control deck and you need to play a more like grindy sort of long game in terms of your plan of winning. And also, I would pretty much never recommend coining out Wild Growth unless you have a 3-drop on the following turn, or if you have like an Innervate 5-drop on the immediate following turn. It's usually better to just save your coin, play it the next turn. And also remember, with things like Coin and Innervate, those cards also reduce the Arcane Giant's cost in addition to ramping you up as well, so you can often get the Giant out sooner than you might think. Next up on our list at number 3, we're taking a look at what we believe is also the best deck in the game probably at the time of making this video, which is Midrange Shaman. So kind of like we've talked about a little bit previously, mid-range decks tend to be just a little bit easier to play than some other archetypes, at least on the forefront, because you're kind of just playing for board presence, playing minions on curve, and then the game becomes a lot like Arena almost. And the current iteration of Midrange Shaman just plays a bunch of super efficient minions, some removal, some AoE spells, and a few utility cards like Mana Tide Totem, and pretty much the only decision you have to make with this deck are how to curve out best, how much to contribute to the board, and when to save versus playing your AoE spells. And there are definitely a few advanced concepts with playing this deck, like minion positioning with Flame Tongue Totem, spell power management for Spirit Claws, but the deck should be pretty easy for anyone to pick up who has a solid understanding of onboard interactions. As long as you're making efficient trades, using your removal and AoE spells at the right time, the deck almost plays itself, and all you really have to do is decide how to interact with your opponent's board. There's definitely some nuanced decisions with this deck, and obviously a higher level of skill will improve your results with it, but Midrange Shaman is one of the decks where a newer player won't necessarily play the deck that much worse than an experienced Legend player might. Comparing this to something like Control Warrior or Freeze Mage, where a newer player is just going to get dominated on, and they're going to play so much worse than an experienced player, it's pretty easy to see why Midrange Shaman earns itself as one of the easier decks in the game to play. So a couple tips and tricks for those of you guys trying to play mid-range Shaman. Definitely remember that your totems, your Feral Spirits, Maelstrom Portals, 1-drops, etc. always spawn to the right of your other minions, so definitely keep that in mind when using your Flame Tongue Totems and positioning. And also, if you're going to use a hero power during a turn, always hero power first, since getting or not getting a spell power totem can definitely change the course of your entire turn, really, whether you spend mana on Spirit Claws, Maelstrom Portals, stuff like that. And also, additionally, if you have 1 more mana than you need to cast Thing from Below, for example, if it costs 4 mana and you have 5 mana remaining, of course you can definitely just totem first, and you'll still be able to play it, and you get a free totem as well. Next up on our list at number 2 is going to be Beast Druid. So we've already talked a little bit about why mid-range decks and kind of just the Druid class in particular is a little bit on the easier side to play compared to some of the other classes, and Beast Druid's definitely no exception. And since all the deck really does is just play a ton of really strong minions, good threats, a few buffs and removal spells, and despite the fact that it does play a bunch of duplicate cards and is actually a very strong deck, it's one of the most arena-looking constructed decks we've ever seen, really. I mean, pretty much all you try to do is you just play your minions and curve out and stick to the mana curve in the best way possible. I mean, all you really need to know to play this deck is that Stranglethorn Tiger is usually the best target for Menagerie Warden. That's pretty much it. For real though, if you just have a basic understanding of curving out, how to do board control well, and a little bit of knowledge about what kind of board wipes there are for your opponents to have in standard, you're pretty much going to be good to go. The only frequently hard decisions in this deck are really just going to be, how much you want to commit to your board, which minions to play in which order, how much value you should try to get with Menagerie Warden, whether to play it on curve and get a 2/2, maybe wait a few turns and get a 5/5 instead. Other than actual minion to minion based combat, there's not a ton of interaction you need to worry about in this deck, and everything is typically really straightforward, and it's definitely one of the easiest decks to play in standard right now that is still competitive, and it's a great way for maybe some of the less competitive players to learn about the standard meta and climb up the ladder, or maybe if you guys just want to play an easier deck. I know for a fact I personally definitely enjoy playing the easier decks in ladder when it comes to my games. And a couple of tips and tricks for those of you guys trying to play this deck, I would definitely recommend, don't try to hold and wait too long on your Menagerie Wardens. Getting another Stranglethorn Tiger with it is great, but you are a tempo-based mid-range deck, so if you wait too long to develop your threats against a slower deck, you might actually end up losing out on tempo and losing the game as a result. Also, don't save your innervates for too long against slower decks. You really want to ramp up fast and early to be able to win against control decks with much stronger late games like N'Zoth options. And also, definitely try to use your swipes as efficiently as you can since your deck doesn't have that many removal spells. And finally, at the top of the list, we have the classic Face Hunter, of course. So one of the most thought-intensive parts of Hearthstone is really just having to decide between attacking the face and attacking the opponent's board, and playing a deck called Face Hunter certainly makes that thought process generally a lot simpler. Because of the things that punish the opponents for having a lot of minions like Unleash the Hounds and Explosive Trap, Face Hunter is one of the only decks that can actually mostly just ignore the opponent's minions and just go face with everything all the time for the entire game. I mean, sure, sometimes you can make really good trades or maybe clear things out with Eaglehorn Bow, but you can generally make a lot less of these decisions than you might in a different aggro deck like Warlock Zoo or maybe Shaman. And this is why, although all three of them are aggro decks, Face Hunter is on the list while the others are not. Its hero power as well as solid comeback mechanics and tons of burst damage means that you can pretty much just go face all day and still really do fine, honestly. I mean, sure, an extremely skilled player is obviously going to win a lot more than a bad one, but in general, Face Hunter has a reputation for being easy to pick up and play, and for good reason. And it's generally also a great budget deck, which makes it a great option for new players to learn the game, to play and experiment with, to learn the meta, and also to climb the ladder with. So a couple tips and tricks for those of you guys trying to play Face Hunter out there. Definitely try to weave in as many hero powers as you can while still developing the board, because it's the only super sustainable source of damage, the repeatable sources of damage that you have, because it's free, right? And also, don't be afraid to be super aggressive and just go super ham at your opponent's face with weapons and other things like that. I mean, sometimes you just gotta go in, you just gotta go ham on your opponent's face. And as well, definitely develop your minions and stuff before using your burst. You definitely want to be able to milk your board presence for as long as you possibly can before your opponent plays like a big taunt creature or some AoE board clear and stuff. Anyway though, what do you think are some of the easiest decks to play in Hearthstone that are still competitive? Definitely let us know in the comments below, and looks like that's gonna be it for me. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. And if you guys enjoyed the video, definitely hit that like button, and let's begin. So first up at number 5, we have Zoo Warlock. Now a lot of you guys might be thinking, what the hell? Zoo's an aggro deck. all you gotta do is play minions and go face, but in truth, Zoo's actually a lot more difficult to play extremely well at the absolute perfect level than you might think. You know, there's a reason why a lot of pro players like Muzzy, like Zixo, can reach super high legend every season with Zoo, while other players are kind of stuck at rank 10 with the exact same deck list. And that difference definitely is not luck. You know, first of all, you have access to life tap, which makes pretty much any deck a lot harder to play and just navigate in general. Your hero power drawing